from our elected officials. As those of you who were with us earlier in the spring, Democratic Speaker of the House, Julie McCluskey, has been joining and supporting us. Senate Minority Leader, Republican Paul Lundeen, joined us over the summer and continues to support this work. Today, it's also my real privilege and honor to bring up to address the group last year's chair of the Joint Budget Committee and somebody who's been a champion for education issues her entire time in the legislature, State Senator Rachel Zenzinger.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited that I get to be here. I actually was teaching today and we get out at 3:30, but I did not have a last hour class. So I buzzed here as quickly as I could and safely. But it gave me an opportunity today to kind of reflect a little bit. During the interim, when we are not in session, I go back to my home district of Jefferson County and I work as a guest teacher, which allows me the opportunity to keep my skills fresh, keep one foot in the classroom. And it also offers me enormous perspective, because every year that I am not teaching and that I'm down at the legislature, I get further and further away from that in the classroom experience that fueled my desire to get involved in policy work from the beginning. I am by profession an educator, and I'm really excited that this group is being brought together and that it's focusing very specifically on the unique talents and needs of educators in this space. Because I think that the policies that are generated by this group will be better informed, quite frankly. And I'm really excited to see what comes of it and to be your champion down at the Capitol when policies are developed by this group. So again, just was really struck by how important this topic is. Every day when I show up as a guest teacher, they give me my lesson plans folder that has all of my rosters and my seating charts and the lesson plans for that day. But they also give me a red folder. And that red folder is in case there's an emergency and what to do, how to evacuate my classroom, or what do I have to do if I have a lockdown drill, or if the fire alarm goes off. And it always reminds me that I need to stay up on these issues. And I'm really glad that that we're going to be focusing on this year. We did make some good progress at the Capitol last year. We created a brand new Office of School Safety. And this was because at the Capitol, we have designed a couple of different grant programs over the years, but they lived in many different departments and they focused on different things. And we didn't really have a unified policy around school safety in Colorado. So I'm really excited that we took this big step last year and we dedicated some enormous resources towards standing up this new office, and that we're able to bring all of the different grant programs under one umbrella. And now I think we're going to be ready to take the next step, which is to be a little bit more intentional rather than reactive. So thank you for inviting me today and giving me a few minutes to share my perspective. And I'm really looking forward to the work that you all come up with.
Thank you very much, Senator Zenzinger. So appreciate you joining us and your continued support for all of the work that we do. Up next, it's really my honor to introduce a special guest. I think everybody in Colorado kind of raised their eyebrows when we heard that Katie Anthus was going to be stepping away after more than a decade of serving the kids and the educators of Colorado. And everybody got a little nervous with this nationwide search where there was some incredible talent that wanted to come lead our school system and try to pick up where Katie was leaving things. A lot of people that were going to be learning Colorado. And I personally, and I think I speak for a lot of us, was very pleased and relieved when they decided to find somebody even more talented than all of those folks trying to come here from out of state, one of our own, somebody who has led a school district, who had gone to another state and helped lead a district there, and fortunately was willing to come back home and lead the K-12 system here as our new Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Susana Cordova. Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, folks. Thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to be here with you. It really has been just great to be back in colorful Colorado. And part of what really encouraged me to come back was all the really important work that's happening to create a landscape that supports both the really important work of making sure we've got great teachers in every classroom, making sure that we're focusing on those strong foundations academically to be in a place where there's been deep investments in helping bring such needed resources back into our schools and classrooms, but also frankly to be in a place where we've been able to pull together so many different community perspectives on creating the kind of enabling conditions for kids to thrive. And it is impossible for kids and teachers to thrive in their schools if they're not safe. And so I think this is some of the most important work that we can do. I was in Texas during the Uvalde shootings, and it just brings home to bear how critically important it is for us to make sure that we're doing all that we can to create a learning landscape for students that focuses on, you know, both how we create the safest schools possible, so that we can focus on the really important work of helping kids thrive. So happy to be here with you and to participate in this.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I know we've got a couple of our other elected officials who I want to thank Senator Lundeen, who has such a long history of supporting education issues, our kids and our educators, and making sure that everybody has access to the kind of education that meets each student's learning style and will prepare them for success in the future. I know Senator Marchman, an educator herself, who has a particular interest in our topic of conversation today, is on the phone. So I really just want to thank all of them. For those of you who are joining today for the first time, I'm going to do just a quick 60-second refresher of where we've been. We started these conversations back in the spring with a commitment to covering the full spectrum of issues, from the more obvious things that people talk about, like building security or threat identification, to really getting at a lot of the root cause things, like how do I identify threats? How do we make sure that from a mental well-being standpoint, our educators and our kids are doing well? And if we're going to tackle this issue of how community violence is spilling over to create violence in our schools and on our school property, how do we better strengthen the relationships between communities? So we had some conversations earlier this year about what is the state of mental well-being of our kids and our educators. We went on to talk a little bit about what are some of the novel programs going on in schools to partner with communities. At our last meeting, we heard from a number of officials across the state in different districts who are taking different approaches to the response to incidents in schools, different types of co-responder models. Today, in response to what a lot of you raised as an important topic, we're going to talk about lockdown drills. And particularly, we're going to have a conversation around what are the effects of these different drills, what happens before them, what happens during the drill, and what happens after, and what are the effects for our kids, our educators, and our communities. So with that, I'm going to ask Carrie to bring up our 4 panelists, Pat, Shawna, Michelle, and Donna. I'm going to spend the least amount of time possible talking. I'm just going to be throwing questions. This is going to be kind of a free-flowing conversation. I'm going to ask each of our guests to respond to some general questions to try to keep everybody focused on the conversation rather than a busy stream of chat. What we did do is set up a Jamboard, and I'm dropping that link in the chat right now. If you've got questions you'd like for the panelists to address as we go forward, drop your questions in there and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We're going to spend 20-30 minutes with this group, listening to them, learning from all of them. Then we're going to go into some breakout groups and let everybody talk in smaller groups about what they took away from this and what it would look like in your unique context to implement some of the ideas that we've started to hear about. But what I'd like to do is just start with a round of introductions. So Pat, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, what organization or district you're with, and what role you play that fits into the conversation about school safety and response to drills.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for allowing me to be on the panel as well. So Pat Hamilton, I'm with Adams 12 5-star schools. I've been the chief operating officer here since 2016, but I've been with the school district since 2001. I served a good portion of that time as the director of security. During that time, that's when we were starting to roll out the concepts that are now known as the standard response protocol. Back then, we were calling that the response action matrix, as well as the standard reunification method. So we worked very closely and continue to work very closely with the I Love You Guys Foundation with some of the work that we do in this space. And we have been doing lockdown drills since I started in the district. I think in 2001, we were doing lockdown drills, not successful lockdown drills, but doing lockdown drills. And we've since modified how we approach that work and continue to do lockdown drills in our schools twice a year, along with other types of drills throughout the year.
Thanks, Pat. And I'm looking forward to asking you some questions about how those drills have evolved and what it's looked like for students and educators. Up next, Shawna, if you'd introduce yourself and your connection to our conversation.
Sure, I'm Shawna Fritzler. I'm the Executive Director of the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation. See some wonderful friends here. Excited to be a part of this. We provide training and resources for schools, districts, both public, charter, and private. So when they need assistance, we brought together a team of experts who has responded to basically every mass tragedy. So in Colorado and outside of the states as well. So we help and make sure people are following best practices.
Thanks, Shawna. Michelle, thank you for joining us. And we're excited to have a perspective, frankly, from outside of the traditional school district. Tell us about how you intersect with this conversation.
Sure. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I have my own private practice. I work with a lot of kids and teens. I work with a lot of families. I've had a handful of kids who've gone through the shootings that have happened here in Colorado or even outside in other states. So, and my specialty is partly trauma. I also work with Denver Children's Home, which is a residential treatment center with a lot of traumatized kids. And they have a connected school there. I do a lot of consulting with the schools, a lot of kids with anxiety just in general, but also with trauma.
Thank you. And Donna, and I hope you'll touch on the diversity of perspectives you bring from the mountains to some of our southern suburban areas.
Hi, everyone. I am Donna Trujillo Reed. I work for Generation Schools Network. I'm a vice president of multi-tiered supports and special populations. Generation Schools gets grant and private donor funding for schools in Colorado and all over Colorado and across the nation. We also do a lot of support around school safety with Stronger Connections grants, bully prevention, coaching, mentoring, training, developing PD, delivering PD, and developing curriculum. We also do a lot of free monthly forums around trauma-informed care, restorative practices. And then I'm also an advocate for students with special and gifted needs. So I'm in and out of schools a lot, have worked with a lot of traumatic experiences through that. I formerly was a director of all 90 schools for special education with Douglas County. And prior to that, I worked with the Colorado River BOCES, formerly Mountain BOCES, for 10 of the districts up there. So I'm very familiar with districts across Colorado, both rural and metro, and also the safety issues. Another side note is my husband and I own a restaurant in Lone Tree. So we interact with a lot of customers and their families on a daily basis and get to hear about their experiences. And it ends up being, as I'm serving them, I end up providing support to them.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you all. We're going to have kind of, like I said, a bit of a free-flowing conversation. There's been a lot of discussion about the use of trauma-informed practices in drills, and whether that's in how we prepare students, how we conduct the drills, how we train those involved in it, or how we handle the post-incident briefings and follow-up. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I don't want to get hung up on what you may call it in your district or your context. We are, for ease, putting it under this big umbrella of trauma-informed practices. But really what we want to get at is how we approach things in a way that minimizes the trauma or the effect of these drills and this incident without numbing kids to it. So the question I'm going to go around is really just to find out, what does that look like? What types of approaches or strategies or elements are you incorporating or have you seen incorporated to try to address this factor instead of just being a cold drill with no notice or consideration for some of these social emotional things? And Pat, I'm going to start with you again. I promise I'll mix it up on some future go-rounds.
Sure. Well, I think we definitely have changed our processes over the years since we first started mandating lockdown drills in our district. So the very first thing we figured out, well, not figured out, but we started to notice is that before we introduced now what we call it the Advancing School Safety DVD, which was a DVD back then, our students and our staff even really weren't taking the drills very seriously. And what we realized is that we weren't telling the people the why behind that. So we created an educational component of a lockdown drill. So before we would do our first lockdown drills every year, we would watch these videos in the classroom, and then every teacher had a discussion guide that they would use in their classroom and talk about why we do these drills. We created policy around that time, which has since been modified, and that policy was we would do an announced lockdown drill every spring and an unannounced drill, announced in the fall and unannounced in the spring. We have since changed that language now. We do not do unannounced drills because they do introduce trauma into a drill that does not need to have trauma in it. You can do drills to create muscle memory. You can do those things. The example I like to use is, if you're in an airplane at 30,000 feet and it loses pressure, what happens? A mask falls from the ceiling. And then do you put your mask on first, or do you put it on someone else first? So that's the example I like to talk to people about, is we don't have to go to 30,000 feet and depressurize an airplane cabin for us to learn that response. And we don't have to introduce trauma into our drills for students to learn what to do with the procedure. So no more unannounced drills. And then something new that we started just this year is now we provide 24 hours advance notice to our parents, to our schools and our parents that we're going to do this drill. And we provide talking points for the parents to have a conversation with their student before the drill ever occurs. Again, trying to reduce the effect of the drill. We're still very much committed to doing those drills because we need for our school communities to know how to respond if there's a violent situation occurring in the building. But again, we are trying to do everything we can to mitigate the traumatic component of that.
Thank you, Pat. Shawna, I'm going to go to you next. And as you mentioned, your group trains a lot of the SROs or the law enforcement, not just in Colorado, but you guys do work around the country. So you're able to bring a unique lens to that. Would love to hear how you approach that and what the thinking has been, not just in your training, but what have you seen in your interactions with the agencies and officers that you're training when it comes to making some of these mental well-being considerations and how things are approached?
Well, our first rule is do no harm with drills. So that's just the basic premise that we want to build on the muscle memory. We know that when there is a crisis event, people develop that tunnel vision and are unable to operate. So I'm sure your psychologist here will have something to say about that too. And they can't operate. So the muscle memory is really important, just like math facts, practicing those kind of things. It's really crucial that your school safety, any of your first responding staff have access to that de-escalation training. And it should be a regular training that they are taking part in. Crisis intervention training should be a part of it. And it should also be focused on youth as well. So we need to make sure that all of our law enforcement partners have access to crisis intervention with a youth basis, because our kids' reaction and youth is anybody who's under 25 years old. We do want to make sure that we have access for everyone to those trainings and that they are ongoing and the practice is ongoing. The family engagement, I'm so glad Mr. Hamilton brought that up. It's crucial that you talk to your families. Certainly, we don't teach tactics to anyone in the community or anybody who's not going to be a first responder. That is critical. We want to make sure tactics are never part of it. That are shared outside, but family engagement is really important. And families in this day and age really should be having family safety plans and having discussions about family safety plans. And to be honest, those of us who, are my age and similar to me, we had tornado drills. So, or, earthquake drills if you lived on the West Coast, but we didn't have these kind of drills. We can actually learn quite a bit about our response in family and in public places and how to work together from our children because of the drills that they've gone through.
Thank you, Shawna. Michelle, I'm going to switch it up a little bit because you don't work inside of a school. You're not responsible for how they do these drills. But what from your work and your understanding are some of the critical child development and child psychology issues that we should be thinking about in putting these drills together, whether it's how we notify or prepare the kids that they're going to happen, how we work with the kids through a drill, and how educators and other building staff are interacting with kids following something like a lockdown drill?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different people that need to be involved. I mean, I think some of this has been mentioned, right? So the families need to know ahead of time, because they're the ones, when they get the kiddo home, that they have to kind of deal with that traumatic reaction or anxiety or whatever is going to happen. You know, some of the research out there is saying that a choice to be involved in the drills, if there's a kid who really is traumatized, giving them a choice to not have to do the drill, but knowing expectations, and how they can keep themselves safe if something like that were to happen. Mental health staff just around a lot, and everybody knowing what the trauma reactions are. So, you know, Shawna, you mentioned, you know, the tunnel vision. I mean, you know, when kids get anxious, it doesn't matter if it's a traumatic reaction or not. They have a hard time concentrating. They have a hard time focusing and taking in information, and then add on any other learning issues or anything like that. And so I think it's partly knowing your kiddos, and knowing how much they can take, what information is appropriate for their age. And also paying attention to how they're reacting prior to, during, and after. I think there needs to be debriefing for, you know, both families and kids. If something happens, the families need to know about it right away. The teachers are going to need to know, because they might see the kid reacting in a certain way that might scare them. The younger kids tend to not be as, they can't process as well. So they're going to have more behaviors, and also not be necessarily have the words for it. They may just look overwhelmed, cry, or act out. So it really is training everybody to notice if there's a change in behavior and what that might be, and checking in frequently. And being able to process it in the way that they can. So the younger kids are probably going to do that through play. As you get a little bit older, they can start to talk about it. But there's also differences, and you get to, you know, kind of mid elementary school, and they are going to focus on like, what did I or didn't I do, but also, is the world a safe place in general? If you get older than that, sometimes they get more angry. Not that you can't have anger at any age, but they want to then react more, and be more aggressive about how does the community pay attention so that I can be safe. So there's a lot of things, I think, age-wise, that I could do hours of. But I do think that it really is paying attention to the reaction of the kids, and also the people that are interacting with the kids. There needs to be some kind of processing. And last thing I'll say is, a lot of the research that I've seen out there is saying that school psychologists really need to be involved in whatever kind of lockdown drills from beginning to end, to help with that knowledge and how to deal with it.
Thank you, Michelle. I think you probably just laid out what will be the first 7 meetings we hold in our work group dedicated to what are the best practices, who needs to be part of that. Really appreciate the perspective. And I know there's a couple of questions dropping on the Jamboard. Please continue to put them there. I'm seeing them, and we will get to them in just a few minutes. I think there's some good questions about student participation and reaction and things like that. But I want to keep going around the horn here. I've got a couple more questions. Donna, you've seen this as a consultant. You've seen it at Douglas County. You saw it in your roll up at the Mountain Now Colorado River BOCES. What should we be thinking about in your mind when it comes to the effects of these events or drills on the different communities of students we have in our schools?
Yeah, so I think first of all is getting to know your students, establishing that relationship so that you can understand what their trauma experiences have been, and also what their response may be. Is it going to be fight, flight, freeze, or submit? And then if you, like you said, Michelle, if you see one of those happening, you know, as an educator, wow, let me jump in and check on this student or connect them with a mental health provider immediately, rather than just, okay, here teachers, do this lockdown drill, follow this protocol. Teachers really need to be able to have some training around trauma-informed care and how to recognize the indicators of trauma and then how to respond to it appropriately, and following those drills, really making sure that there's a debriefing with students, so that, and it may be on an individual basis, it may be in a small group depending on the student. And as far as individual students, every student is different. And there are some with some significant needs who may go through the day looking like they're okay, but something happens and it sets them off and they'll stuff it down and save it for home. And then they get home and the parents don't know what to do. So also giving parents resources to have the conversations, letting parents know if there was an issue that occurred during the drill so that they can then wrap around to the school and or refer to their resources for their child. I also agree with having students opt out of drills. A lot of kids with IEPs especially cannot handle the drills, and there's other ways that you can teach them, and maybe rather than being part of a whole school drill, they can be individualized and coached that way. Or if they connect better with social stories and practicing that way, there's so many avenues for practicing rather than just doing it as a whole school.
Thank you, Donna. Really helpful to hear that perspective. And I'm seeing more and more questions pop up. This is where I'm going to kind of call an audible. I'm going to continue with the direction of our conversation, but I'm going to start weaving in some of these questions because I want to respect all of the members that are giving their time to be here. And I'm going to offer 2 questions for each of our panel to answer. You can choose which one. One, I'm going to ask, what does this look like, or what should it look like for different groups of students? Whether we're talking about students with special needs, or we're talking about different age group students, are there different considerations based on the school size? So would love your thoughts if you want to jump in on how should we be approaching this, if at all, differently for different students. And Shawna, I'm going to get to you first because I know you've got especially safe, and this is something you've spent a lot of time on. So would love to hear from everybody. Does this look differently for different students? And or if you want to weigh in on a different question, we don't just have educators on this call. We have some business leaders. We have community leaders. So we all sit here in the education world talking about trauma-informed practices and pedagogy, and we throw a lot of words that mean a lot to us. But break it down. When we say, let's incorporate some trauma-informed practices, what tangibly does that look like, either for all students or for different groups of students? And Shawna, I'll go to you first.
Well, I want to make you aware of a resource that we developed in collaboration with Safe and Sound Schools. Those were the moms from Sandy Hook who lost their children. We have a resource on our website called Especially Safe, and those are for different abilities, anyone with different abilities, and you should be doing pre-planning for everyone in your building. So at any given time, you could have other parents, grandparents in your schools. So when you're doing drills or when a crisis does occur, so it's crucial. We make these resources, all of our resources are available free or very, very low cost, whatever we can do. But this one is free, and that's pre-planning for those special education students. But what about the pregnant teacher? So because you did a drill at the beginning of the year and you didn't know that she was pregnant. So, and now you know that you have something coming towards the end of the year, and we have to make different adjustments for those. And the different parent volunteers or community volunteers who are in our schools at any given time. And then in Colorado, you also need to remember that we have a number of family members, parents in our community who are already traumatized from prior crisis events. So it's crucial for them to know as well, for their children to feel safe in school, for them to feel safe to send their children to school when they've already been through an extremely traumatic event. And we even have some of those teachers who have been impacted by previous events. And so even things like, the bells ring and things like that have to be changed in some of our schools to respond to traumatic events that they've already experienced.
Thank you, Shawna. This is where I'm just going to start mixing it up a little bit. Michelle, talk to me about different groups of students and what this may need to look like, or what we should be thinking about differently for different aged or differently situated kids?
Sorry. Younger kids, they're more, and I'm talking, could be 5 and under, 6 and under. My kiddo was at a school and had an incident that happened outside. So things happen wherever. But the way you talk with younger kids, it's got to be more simple language. It's got to be kind of, I would always ask, what kind of things scare you now? What, if you're trying to find out triggers, you got to ask general questions rather than leading them. They may not be able to talk as much, but if you notice they're getting wiggly and things like that, you need to ask what's going on with them. Someone who might be more verbal, so older, an adolescent, they're going to be able to talk to you potentially about things, or they may not. Some people tend to withdraw. So, different, I think Shawna's talking about, there's so many different learning issues and variations of things. So, I guess if you want to go by age, adolescents generally can talk to you more, but I can tell you from my practice, I work with a lot of adolescents who are traumatized. They have a hard time verbalizing. When they get traumatized, they're going to backtrack in their development. So the more verbal somebody might be and older, they may not be as verbal. They may be more quiet. So those kinds of kids are going to probably need to be more one-on-one with somebody to check in with them. I think teachers have an enormous responsibility, and it's really is knowing your kids and knowing how they respond. I think that was a great answer, Donna. It really is getting to know your kids, and also the families trusting you so that they can get the resources they need very quickly. So I've seen a lot of withdrawing. Those kinds of kids, they need them more one-on-one. It's not going to be in the big group. And even if you ask in the big group, I do think having, either their teacher or someone that they trust or the mental health person meeting with them to check in with them frequently. Hey, how are you doing? I know that was really hard. Is there anything that you need? Providing them with services, being available. All this stuff is really challenging in the current system that we have. We've got a lot of mental health professionals that are they're spread thin, teachers are spread thin. So I think trying to figure out a way that we can change that a little bit, ideally, would be most helpful.
Thank you.
Kind of got off track there, Barrick, but.
No, it's quite all right. That's what I had brought all the participants and members of CSSI here. I told all the panels I had 5 brilliantly scripted questions that we were going to go completely off script and just discuss what made sense to this group. Donna, talk to me a little bit about what we should be thinking about differently for different groups of students.
So I think in hearing Shawna and Michelle talking, my brain immediately went to a situation I addressed with the school resource officer last week. He said that he meets with a group of students each week, and he asks them how they're doing each day on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being their worst. And he said he started getting responses of 10 zillion, 1 billion. And so I said, wait, we got to go back and talk about what feelings are, what they're feeling. A lot of times students cannot recognize their actual emotion or why they're feeling it that way. So we set up a system that he was going to try this week to label the emotion and be able to sense what their feelings are to describe it. And that way, when we're in lockdown drills, I'm thinking, wow, like you said, Michelle, a lot of people may not even talk when they're afraid, or they may withdraw. We need to maybe teach them, have a signal of pointing to a color or putting their finger up, 1, I'm okay, 2, I'm a little on edge, 3, I'm terrified, right? Teach the kids that signal so that they don't have to use verbal communication. And also, even in those lockdown drills, when they have to be completely silent, teaching them modes to be able to communicate visually is also another way to keep them safe. And then if you see a student at the end of the drill, you can have your kids then say where they're at and know which groups may need to connect further, or which parents you might need to contact and have a conversation to get some more resources for them and their child. But I think it's not just on school psychologists or mental health professionals to do this. It's on the shoulders of everyone who's an educator in that school and who's there in those moments.
Thank you, Donna. Pat, I'm going to put the same question in your lap, but I'm also going to ask you, break this down to some plain language. Does it look differently for different students? And for those who aren't child psychologists or even educators, when we're having these conversations about, let's make sure we incorporate trauma-informed practices into our, what are we talking about?
So in short, yes, it does. So I will tell you that Especially Safe is the resource that we use to help plan our drills when we are talking about our students that have additional needs. So it's a great resource. So thank you, Shawna. I didn't realize that DeAngelis Foundation had worked on that along with Michelle Gay and her group. So it's a great resource and one we use. We are still, like I mentioned earlier, that this is the first year that we've started informing our parents and school community that it's 24 hours in advance. That's what our requirement is, that we let parents know 24 hours in advance. So we're still kind of learning this space and getting that feedback from parents of what their expectations are, or what changes we might need to make to our drills to be able to accommodate their students' needs. So we're still in this learning space, but it is different. And with students with IEPs, sensory issues, things like that, we have been working with those students for a while now, and it does require, the key thing there is that we have to have a teacher who knows that student. The challenge is, and I'll just address this and get it out in the room, the challenge is, as many of us, if we have drills that are required within the first, say, 60 days of school, you may not have a teacher who's established that relationship yet to really know what that student needs. But I think a lot of us are trying to get those drills in a reasonable time from when school starts, and then again back at the second semester we try to get those in within 60 days as well. So that's presenting a challenge. Informing our parents so they can tell us what the students' needs are, that helps us, and it's much faster, a much quicker way for us to find out what those needs are before we get into a space where we're doing that first drill. The other thing is how you talk to your students about it before the drill ever occurs. The District 12 actually just got done. We are in the final draft or final edit stages of a video that we've created that talks about the standard response protocols that's designed specifically for K through second grade, so kindergarten through second grade. It's narrated by students. It's much easier, plain language that they understand, and it's really focused around, we do these things to keep everyone safe. So that will be coming out. Like the last time we did a video like this, if anyone wants it, once it's out there, we'll share it with anyone who wants it. So it's all free stuff. So I think it's how you address this issue with your students before the drill ever occurs. Having that conversation before is really key, and then letting your parents, informing them so they can tell you, my student needs this, and we give students the option of not attending school that day. Interestingly enough, we've gone through our first round of drills this year, and we have the data. I actually shared it with Barrick. We have data that looks at the previous week's attendance and then the week of the drill, that attendance rate. And what we saw was quite surprising, that we saw in a high school of 2,000 kids, the attendance difference was about 10 to 15 students is all. So, and then in some cases, we actually saw the weeks of drill attendance, there was higher attendance on the drill week than not the drill week. Now that's only one data set, and we will continue to do that every semester when we run drills. We want to see if there's trend data that shows that more and more students are not coming to school, and if so, let's engage the community and have the conversation as to why. But that's I am not a psychologist, so that's the best answer I can give you on some of that stuff.
Thank you, Pat. And fortunately, we have one sitting here with us. We've got about another 10 minutes in this panel. I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to try to be looking at these other questions. I also want to recognize we're all trying to inform work at the local level and identify some priority practices. We also have a number of our legislators who are here listening to all of you. So I'm going to give priority when I open it to the floor. I know I see Senator Lundeen, Senator Zenzinger, Senator Marchman. If any of you have questions for this panel, feel free to raise your hand and I'll make sure we get you in there. Otherwise, I just want to, again, thank you for being here listening. Michelle, there was kind of a tap for somebody with more clinical knowledge. And then I'm going to open it up with some other conversations about this debate around how much do we drill and how much do we notify. But Michelle, jump in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I do think we really also need to pay attention to the reaction and history or confidence of the teachers that are also having to implement these drills. Because, given that we've had some school shootings in our state and, people are connected across the country, I think teachers are more scared sometimes, and, this brings up things for them, but so also, kind of taking an inventory of our teachers and checking in with them and what support do they need to feel confident in the classroom when we're dealing with the lockdown drills, because it does bring up things for them too. So I just wanted to kind of add that as much as, yes, we absolutely need to focus on the students, but we also need to take care of our educators and our administrative staff. I mean, it's not just them, it's everybody. And so, thinking about what do they need and how can we provide that to them to help them be successful, because if they're confident and, can be there for the students, then the students will also be better prepared.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm going to be transparent. We're not going to be able to get to all of the questions. I am going to, and my panelists don't know I was going to say this. I'm going to take these other questions and share them back out with all of you in case over the next week you want to layer in some thoughts. But I want to follow this topic we're talking about the pre-notification. And there's been questions raised. Pat, you and I had a good conversation a week or two ago about some folks are saying that when you pre-notify, kids opt out and then they don't know what they should be doing. Would love to hear from everybody on the debate of should we notify or not. There's also the criticism that you drill too much and kids become numb to it. And then some research was flagged to me about this new world we're living in, where virtual world and real world are kind of blurring for a lot of our kids. It's not the world all of us grew up in, and I won't date myself to go with everybody else, but our kids are living in a mixed world. The Pew Research said that 97% of kids are playing some kind of video games, and 2/3 of those are action and adventure. And I think we can read into that a good amount of violence. And when school drills seem more tame than what these kids are seeing on CNN or on their PlayStation, how does that come into how you're approaching these drills? And so I'm going to open it up for folks to dig into the pre-notification and to what degree there's desensitizing from the volume of them. There's an absence of learning if they opt out. And how do we deal with the world that they function in on a screen seeming so much more intense than yet another drill that we've got going on? And I'm going to go with Shawna first, and then Michelle, I'm going to ask you from the child development side on this.
Well, obviously we'd like to see everybody participate in a drill. As a parent myself, so Senator Zenzinger and I both have, children around the same age, they're in college now. And things have changed quite a bit in the drills. The kindergarten that our kids attended, they banged on the doors and the kindergartners were terrified. Again, our practice and best practice now is we do no harm. And we do want just that muscle memory development. A number of our children actually from Jeffco in particular have led lockdown drills at their campuses, at their college campuses, because of the practices that we have taught over the years. So that is certainly a win. It's terrible that anybody's involved with that tragedy. We would like to have everybody do a drill in some way. Of course, your psychologist here, age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, making a pre-plan Any families that have trauma, you need to deal with that in advance. Any student who has an IEP, you really should be doing an especially safe plan with them at the same time, so that you're going through that. Any of your teachers, you can do drills separately with your teachers also. Perhaps that's a good thing for their staff development meeting. So to go through those projects, we would like to see everybody to do a drill in some way. And more than one drill. More practice is always better because you're building the muscle memory. And again, do no harm. We don't want these drills to put fear in anyone's, for anyone, not the kids, not the families. But your messaging to the families absolutely should occur. But conversations and tips for conversations with those families, and what is your family safety plan? Because I haven't yet spoke to a parent group where more than a couple people have a safety plan in place for their family. And it really is something that they should be talking about. I don't know about you all, but certainly when I was growing up, we had the fire safety plan in our house, how you would get out of your room and where we would meet, or any of those things. Tornado drill, we had the same thing. And we should be doing the same as those.
Thank you. Michelle, your thoughts. At what point do we desensitize, and how do we balance with the need to drill countered with the world that some of these kids are living in online?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, again, it is knowing your kids. The desensitization is real. And, a lot of times kids that are desensitized are disconnected. And so, if the danger piece, they enjoy that, or, they want to be involved in that says something about them, and we need to pay attention to that. I do think there needs to be some conversation, like Shawna's saying. It's not that we just don't, prepare them, but I think the kids who've been truly traumatized need a different way of preparing for something happening, and also may need extra support and hearing it. And then somebody who is desensitized and really doesn't care. I think that's a whole nother issue for that kiddo, and maybe even for the family, getting them support. But I do think that it is a problem with, the question is, are parents monitoring what they're doing? And I think it's a challenge. The whole electronic and tech world has blown up my practice. I can tell you that. It's challenging. There's good things about it, and there's also really challenging things about it. And so, research says that some kids find it boring and they don't really want to engage in that thing and believe that it's not going to happen to them. And then there's others who just don't want to even touch it because they have the trauma history. And so I really think it is figuring out that piece, and where do you need to talk to them to prepare everybody.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to move us into breakouts in just a minute, but Pat, I want to circle back to you on this question, since you touched on the attendance. Where would you weigh in on this? What is the effect on kids of that online world, and the effect when they know about the drills, or we do so many drills?
I think it comes back to me I don't want to introduce, I want to do everything I can to minimize the traumatic part of this. It is still going to be, there's an awareness moment. There's a couple of different studies out there. One is the journal School Violence, and another one School Psychology Review. But Dr. Jackie Schildkraut, I think is her name. Dr. Jackie is what we call her. They've done some studies on this, and it's for us to say that we are, no matter what we do, we're not going to introduce some fear or some trauma to this is not correct, because it does. You are, at the very least, you are making people aware that this could happen in our school, and that's why we have to practice and drill this. So just, I think by doing as much advanced communication as we can to try to minimize that. And there's been some great suggestions today about, watching for symptoms that may not be something that we look for every day. But I think doing what we can to minimize the trauma is the best thing we can do right now. I agree with Shawna that I think it's really important to practice the protocol. And if a student's not super engaged in that, if we have an opportunity to talk to that student about the why, that's an opportunity to have that conversation. It might not have anything to do with the drill at all, and it might lead to some other conversations that we need to be having with that student and that family. But again, if in the situation of a real situation occurring, even if a student's been desensitized to this, I need them to go into a reaction mode of like, I know what to do to keep myself safe in this situation. That's my goal in this situation, is for them to go into that automatic response mode. So that's kind of the approach we've taken. And then as far as like I said, we only have one. We just started the practice of notifying parents 24 hours in advance this year, and we have one data set so far, but we will continue to add to that each semester when we do that. But that is our plan so far, and we're going to keep moving forward at that.
Thanks, Pat. With that, I'm going to start moving us into some breakout conversations. As I said, if we've got questions from our legislators or questions on the jam boards, I'm going to implore on our panelists to let me reach out to all of you and keep it engaged. As we do with all of these conversations, we're also going to keep the jam boards open for the next couple of weeks. So bookmark those links if you're a participant. Feel free to drop more questions on. We're going to do the same with our breakout groups. I'm going to real quick put up on the screen what we'll be talking about in the breakout groups, but it's really just picking up on where we are right now. We want to understand from all of you, looking at it through your unique lens of either the school or the community that you work in. What did you take away? How did what you heard differ or align with what you do? And what would it look like to implement some of these ideas that you've just heard in this panel at the school level, in the classroom level, at the individual student, or at the system level? And what, if anything, could be the role of the community? And what would be some of the barriers, whether those barriers are financial or resources, whether they're technical, or whether they're cultural shifts within your schools? So we're going to switch into some breakout groups for some open conversations. I'm going to just forewarn that the share outs after it are going to be lightning rounds, because I want to leave as much time in these breakout groups. We're going to go into breakout groups for the next 20 minutes. I'm going to ask Carrie to bring us back together at 4:45 sharp. We'll do some quick share outs and we'll talk about what's next. Again, bookmark the jam boards you're going to get in your breakout groups, because we'd like to keep these conversations going. Carrie, why don't you go ahead and send us all out our ways?
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Maybe we're our own breakout?
Hey guys, I
Yeah.
think you all joined a little late, so I'm going to pop you into, or somehow didn't get populated into the breakout group. So I'm going to figure out how to get you over there real quick.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I am committed to getting us out of here on time, if not a minute or two early. So I'm going to start, and as I said, we're doing lightning round, and I will model that here. I will also confess that my group went completely off script. We rarely use the Jamboard. I'm going to plead with everybody to drop some thoughts on there, but we did have some good conversations about some of folks' takeaways and some of what we face going forward. And there was an interesting conversation in particular about whether we need to normalize drills, and the thought that we need to normalize them to the extent that they're not intimidating and an additional stressor on our kids. But several folks raised the point that these aren't drills like we all knew. And this is one where I will date myself, having gone to school here in Colorado in the 70s and 80s, when our drill was me hiding under the desk out of fear of an inbound Soviet missile. That was not something that ever happened. However, as Commissioner Cordova pointed out, what we're drilling for now is something that too many kids are having to worry about. It is real. It is real for them and for the educators. And we talked about the need to make sure that we're considering both our kids and our educators in how we prepare them and how we emotionally and mentally support them before and after. One of our members is part of an ed prep program and leads that, trains a lot of our teachers here, and was very transparent in saying, we need to do more there. She's here learning and bringing things back to that ed prep program. Some folks highlighted the simple things we can do, and this is going to sound unrelated, but something like a push lock door instead of the stress that takes place when somebody has to scramble and go find that key. And what does that little incident do? And what's the cost? And might we be able to come up with funds, whether it's bond dollars, or I'm looking at my friends here in the legislature, other state dollars to help some of our schools convert there. But we did talk about some of the challenges that, yes, it's money, and that's a very real one. It's not just an excuse. There's also time involved. How do we find the time to provide the training and the support and the development? And where do we find the expertise? Is there sufficient expertise available to come in and provide that kind of support and training? So a lively conversation. We're going to leave the Jamboard open. I'm going to plead with all of the groups to continue adding to those Jamboards so we can capture all of your thoughts. But with that, Evan, I'm going to throw it over to you.
And I'm going to find mute and come off, and I can actually build on what you shared from your group with mine, Barrick. We did have a good conversation on drills and the concept of practice, and looking at it in a couple of different perspectives, and just a couple of different potential needs that were surfaced. So what we had a leader of out of school time programming in our group who was wondering about, like, what can our out of school time providers, kids spend more time outside of school than in school, like how can they support drilling in similar ways, or having sort of a similar context to what the school district is doing in order to sort of give students more of that muscle memory, and then what training does that mean? How does that all translate to an out of school space? I think was kind of the question that came up there. And then we also had a very lively discussion around, you'll have guest teachers. Some of us on this call serve as guest teachers or substitutes, and they might not have all of the context for what the different student needs are. They might not know where to look, might not know what exit that they're going for if there is a drill or if something happens, things like that. So what are some of those best practices that we're looking for in schools, so that when you have a guest teacher or you have a sub, how are they being prepared to sort of meet to support their students and sort of meet the needs, those safety pieces. Finally, and sort of the last thing that I'll share is we had a good conversation around both for the role of the community and for supporting parents, students in particular, just real needs around accessing these resources from a language perspective and from a cultural perspective, and just ensuring that all of our families can sort of have the resources that they need to, for example, have some of those conversations at home that Pat was alluding to, that they've embedded in Adams 12 this year.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate you. Shamita.
Yeah, our group had a really robust conversation first, just talking about the importance of knowing what your community and what your district and what your school really needs. And so administrators talking with teachers, talking with students to understand how to better improve the drills, but then not just the administrators, also having the directors of security, the people who are also running the drills, having those conversations and getting feedback as well. We also talked about the importance of communication and making sure that that communication is clear and it's consistent on even like the rationale for why the drill is happening, but then having that same consistent communication coming from schools and then hearing it from families, kind of like Evan was saying, so that there's alignment on why we're doing those drills so that students understand what they are and the importance of participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamita and Evan. I know how much of a challenge it is to try to take a 25-minute, extremely thoughtful conversation and share it back out so quickly. We'll put notes together, and as we always do, the video from this meeting, not the breakout groups, but from the main session, and then our notes and this share out will get posted onto the website at saferschoolsinitiative.org/Colorado. I'm going to briefly share a slide to share where we're going to be going for the remainder of the year. We're meeting again on November 28th, again at our usual time of 3:30. In response to requests from all of you and from members, we're going to have a couple of different conversations. First, we'll get an update on some different things going on around the state, including the work of the interagency work group, the new Office of School Safety led by Chris Harms, who's with us right now. We'll also then talk about alternative placements, and we'll get the perspective of what's going on in our state right now, from the number of options to the processes and protocols and some of the considerations for placing students in different types of schools based on different situations. Then we're also going to have a conversation about justice-involved youth. There's been a couple of different questions raised by different stakeholders around what should the rights be of previously justice-involved students getting back into a school or school system, and some questions raised by some superintendents around the state about making sure that they're aware of situations like that if they took place at another district. So with respecting all the issues of privacy, we're not going to be taking a position on these, but we want to have this group weigh in and educate and learn from some folks about what is going on. Then I think folks know that we're moving towards putting in an interim set of recommendations based on some of the ideas you all have raised. Things like we talked about today, about whether there's a need to pre-notify parents and families and communities about lockdown drills. What should be the practices used when we have those? How can we approach different types of models and co-responder models for responding to different incidents? So we're going to be taking all of the ideas you all have shared, and at our December 13th meeting, we're going to share an initial framework of interim recommendations for all of you to react to and for us to discuss and see if there are ideas that we want to go ahead and publish and share with state leaders and with system leaders and with others. We've got just a few minutes left, and I'm never afraid to give people a few minutes back. Before I do, though, I want to open the floor to some of our state leaders. Office of School Safety Director Chris Harms, Commissioner Cordova, Senator Zenzinger, Senator Marchman. Anything any of you would like to say to the group before we let folks go?
Just thank you for being here and helping us think about all these things. And thank you, Confluence and PEBC, for facilitating.
Of course, thank you. Commissioner, anything? She didn't know I was putting her on the spot.
I would just echo that same thing. This is not an easy topic and there are not easy solutions, but I think it is so important to take into consideration all of the diverse voices around how we approach this work to create the kind of enabling conditions for kids to learn. So just really appreciate everybody's perspectives and the unique views that you bring to the table.
Thank you, Commissioner. We know your schedule. We appreciate you joining us today, and we particularly appreciate you coming back to Colorado. We need you. Senator Zenzinger or Senator Marchman, anything from either of you?
Well, I just want to say thank you. I think it's really important, if we're going to have good policy, that we dig behind the headlines, that we have multiple repeated and deep conversations about these topics before we rush to policy. And so I'm really excited. Already I've heard 2 new things that I didn't know before. So I always think that that's very helpful. And then some of my own beliefs were affirmed, and then some of them were questioned. And I think that is good too. So I'm really pleased by the conversation, and I look forward to the outcomes. and in learning from this conversation.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Marchman.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I, like Senator Zenzinger, learned a few things, and I was so happy to have some of my thoughts affirmed. Being in the school buildings as a teacher, as an adult, and seeing what students go through and what guest teachers go through and what other people go through, I'm so glad we have the best minds working on this. So I'll stay a champion of school safety and just look forward to continuing to learn from this. And I cannot wait to see what you guys do next. So thank you for including me today.
Thank you, Senator. And in the last 60 seconds, I have to say, we wouldn't be able to do this without my collaborator on this, Susana and PEBC. And while I spend a lot of time on screen talking, the real hard work is done by the amazing team at Confluence and PEBC. Jamita, Evan, Carrie, thank you all so much. And none of this would be possible. It certainly would not be as smart without the 200 plus people who have been a rotating group of 70, 80, 100, all of you who we know are very busy doing your day jobs. And we are grateful that all of you have come here to help us get smarter, to help the state of Colorado get smarter, to make sure our kids, our educators, and our communities get safer by the day, not the other way around. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your time and allowing us to be facilitators of this conversation. With that, we'll follow up with everybody by email, and we'll see you again after the Thanksgiving holiday on November 28th. Thank you all very much.